Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. My name is Nick Marquardt, and I'm truly honored to accept this award for our work on proxemic interactions, also on behalf of Till Ballendat and Saul Greenberg. Till was a visiting research student at our lab in Calgary at that time and now works for Avanade, and Saul was my PhD advisor. And the work presented in the paper started in 2009 when Till came over to the group lab in Calgary shortly after I started my PhD there working with Saul. And this work was part of a larger research theme that included a number of different projects, some of which I'll refer to a little bit later in this talk. So over the next 15 minutes, I'd like to guide you through our research towards proxemic interactions, but also some of the work that was done in the time that followed, and include a discussion of the use of theory as well. Now, the message I'd like to deliver is that social science theory can inform and inspire the design of socially natural, fluid experiences with digital surfaces and devices. And in particular, I'd like to address the following 3 points. First, what is proxemics and why does it matter for us in interaction design? Second, how can we leverage proxemics in the design of interactive systems, which is primarily also then summarizing key techniques from our 2010 paper. And third, I'd like to reflect a bit on the work since then and briefly discuss theories in HCI more generally. So let me start with the question of what is proxemics and why does it matter for us in interaction design? In ubiquitous computing, or UbiCom, people are interacting with an ecology of devices, phones, tablets, large displays, information appliances, or smart objects. The problem is that it's often awkward and difficult to interconnect these devices, let alone interact and transfer content between them in a cohesive manner. And with our work in 2010, we proposed and imagined a different kind of UbiCom where an ecology of devices reacts to the social expectations of people in a way that facilitates natural social practice. And in the sketch over here, for example, we see people who are carrying a number of digital devices moving in and out of a room with a large digital touch display. And we wanted to find out, what could we do if the display knew exactly who and where people are in the room? How can we ease the connection and information exchange between the display and people's devices, or between devices and the various information appliances in the room? What we're really talking about is exploiting social sciences as a method to drive the design of interactive systems. And in particular, we wanted to take advantage of people's natural expectations of spatial relations, which brought us to the theory of proxemics. It was in the 60s that anthropologist Edward Hall defined the notion of proxemics. And proxemics is a theoretical lens about how people manage their interpersonal space. Hall's basic theory correlates physical distance to social distance. Being physically closer to another person can indicate closer social distance. More formally, Edward Hall then described a series of zones around people. Starting from the inside, at the closest proximity, we have the intimate zone, and that's usually reserved for interaction with people we know really well. Next, we have the personal zone, where close friends and colleagues are situated relative to another when they interact. The social zone, at a larger distance, is where we interact with people in a more formal setting, for example, the workplace. And finally, we have the public zone, reserved for things like strangers occupying a space, where people tend to separate themselves by distance when they can. Now, we're all very good at recognizing behaviors of proxemics in real life, often without even noticing it. So let me show you a number of examples that illustrate of why proxemics is so effective. This photo shows an example where we can almost see these invisible bubbles of personal space around each of the people sitting there. In the second example, you can see how people's orientation and proximity to another can also signal social engagement or disengagement. Both times we see people sitting on a bench, 2 strangers at the top and 2 people more familiar with another at the bottom. Here we can see different groups, where closer proximity and orientation towards others indicates who's part of each of the groups. And here's another example about proxemics. Past President Lyndon B. Johnson was known for his domineering personality. In what became known as the Johnson treatment, he would intentionally penetrate people's personal space, as seen in the series of photos of him interacting with the senator. And it was said that this treatment was rude, improper, and annoying, but also very effective. And we usually notice such violations of proxemics very quickly when they happen. Now, there are many more theories that considered other aspects and nuances important in proxemics. And in my PhD work that followed the 2010 paper, I attempted to unpack these in more detail. But for this talk, what is most important is that we can consider proximity and a few other attributes as a reasonable first approximation of social engagement. So now that we talked about what proxemics is, let me talk about how we can leverage those nuances of proxemics in the design of interactive systems. The first question we had to answer was how to operationalize proxemics as metrics we could capture from our environment. And the results we broke down into 5 dimensions: distance, orientation, movement, identity, and location. And let me quickly guide you through those 5 dimensions. First, we have the distance between entities, between people and the devices around them, and being closer to a device indicates an increase in the likelihood we want to interact with it. Second, we use the relative orientation of one entity to another. Do I face towards a large interactive display or do I face away from it? Third, we consider the movement between people and devices, the ways we accelerate and slow down. Fourth, we consider the identity of the people and the devices in that space. And last, the contextual information about the location. In here of particular interest are what Hall called the fixed features of a room, such as positions of walls and doors, and the semi-fixed features, such as the locations of furniture. So in proxemic interactions, we imagine a world of devices that have fine-grained knowledge of nearby people and other devices, and how such knowledge can be exploited in UbiComp interaction design. And earlier work inspired our explorations, and there are 2 projects in particular I'd like to point out. First, Dan Vogel's interactive public ambient displays, and second, Wendy Ju's range whiteboard. And both of these projects began to consider proximity to mediate interactions with large interactive surfaces. So inspired by proxemic theories, those 5 characteristics, and the earlier work that was done in HCI, we began considering these dimensions to mediate people's implicit and explicit interaction with digital surfaces. In our work, we use the Proxemic media player as a running example. And in a few short videos, I will show you briefly how the interactive behaviors then consider fine-grained proxemic measures. The paper introduced a proxemic interaction in 5 key themes, which were the use of continuous movement and discrete zones, interpreting directed attention to objects, devices, or people, forms of explicit interaction, mediating people-simultaneous interaction, and moving from awareness to interaction. And for the scope of this talk, I focus on those 3. So let's start with the first one about continuous and discrete zones. When the person enters the room, our system detects the present and starts the media player. As the person then approaches the display, more content of the video collection is continuously revealed. The person can then explore and select videos through direct touch when standing in close proximity to the display, as you can see here. And when taking a seat, the video player reacts to this discrete event and implicitly switches to a full screen view. So we integrated both elements. Continuous approach, where the proximity-dependent continuous reveal shows more and more content, and discrete zones, such as the one of the touch interaction or changing view when sitting down. In the next example, we illustrate the interpretation of directed attention. Here, the application considers a person's relationships to nearby objects. For example, the video playback is paused during implicit actions that the system recognizes, such as when the person answers a phone call, or when turning away to read a magazine, as you can see here. Now, when the person then looks back at the screen, the playback resumes and everything is normal. In the last example, let's have a closer look at how the system can then mediate simultaneous interaction of multiple people. Now, in this example, a second person is entering the room, and the system is trying to accommodate both people interacting simultaneously. First, the screen reveals minimal information at the top of the screen. Then, when the person moves closer to the screen, the system splits the view, so both people can either interact or continue watching. And in this last view, the person in front blocks the sitting person's view completely. Now, a system can identify this conflict, and in this case gives the person full control over the display. And when the second person sits down, both views get merged. Now, this is an interesting case where there's a potential conflict of user interest, and in a way, it's up to social protocol and conventions to mitigate such conflicts, and it doesn't always have to be the system trying to solve a conflict in this case. Now, these were 3 of the examples of the behaviors we investigated in our paper from ITS 2010. And as I mentioned earlier, the project at ISS that year was a key paper that kickstarted our larger research theme of proxemic interactions, and there were several research projects that followed. And there's one project in particular I'd like to point out. This paper followed 2 years later and directly continued the work on proxemic interactions. More specifically, it introduced a design pattern based on the notion of gradual engagement. And that is, as a device gets closer to another, it signals awareness of device presence and connectivity in the social zone, reveal of exchangeable content in the personal zone, and it offers interaction methods to transfer content tuned to each of the 3 different zones. Now let's look at an example that explicitly shows these stages of gradual engagement. When a person enters the room, an icon on the large display indicates the camera's presence. As a person then moves closer to the display, the images stored on the camera are progressively revealed, and the person can use a tilt gesture to scroll through the different images. And when they drag them onto the display, they get transferred between. And then last, when dragging any of the images onto a portal icon of a picture frame, the image is then transferred to that frame, as here on the left side. Here's another example. In this case, the large display shows awareness icons of nearby tablets, and by moving closer, the tablet's content is progressively revealed. At the display, the content is fully visible and interactive, and the person can exchange notes by dragging them between the display and the view of the tablet. By lifting the tablet, a user can select individual notes, and once touching them, they can be edited on a tablet and sent back by either touching the display or closing the note on the tablet. So both of these short videos illustrate ways of how we can tune the interaction method to transfer content to each of those stages of the gradual engagement pattern. Now, in the last part of this talk, I'd like to conclude with a brief discussion of proxemic interactions and also theories in HCI more generally. Work on proxemic interactions in the past 10 years covered many different areas. And while there's not enough time to cover all of them, here are a few examples covering proxemics in contexts such as museum exhibits, gameplay, visualization exploration, art installations, and several more. And a few of these projects came out of meetings such as the 2013 Dagstuhl seminar organized by Saul, Casper, Aaron, and Harald. And this event was an excellent opportunity and platform for researchers interested in the field, and we need more of these events. As for the key direction the field is heading to, 2 examples are the themes of recent workshops in proxemics. First, there's the question about how proxemic characteristics translate to mobile interactions, as much of the work so far covered mostly stationary large surfaces and installations. And second, there are the questions around how to make it feasible to bring proxemic interactions outside of the lab into the wild, where technical and social challenges are the key areas to address. And there's much potential in both of those directions for future work. When designing new proxemic interaction behaviors, there are also other challenges to tackle, such as those of social relations and norms, privacy, or authentication. And we believe that the discussion of our work should also include and concern dark patterns. Because as researchers, we design with our white hats on for the good to improve human experiences. But the problem is that we should also expect black hat designs based on proxemic interactions that do not have the user's best interest in mind. And Saul and others wrote a paper called Dark Patterns in Proxemic Interactions at DIS in 2014. Now, more generally reflecting about theories, there is a gap between the translation of theory to practice. In particular, it's important to consider whether theories are used as strict prescriptions or more broadly as metaphors when we apply them as an inspiration for our designs. Theories around proxemics in our community can both inform designs, but also help as a theory for studying interaction practices. And for the latter, the work of interaction proxemics by Helena Mentis, Kenton O'Hara, and others stands out as a fascinating example of studying interactions with a lens of proxemics. It's interesting to think about what other theories could be formed, either as new theories or as theories from other fields that are then operationalized within the context of HCI. And I remember that in the beginning of my PhD, working on proxemic interactions, I was tempted of including too many aspects, dimensions and characteristics, and I didn't want to be incomplete, to miss anything, so it became more and more fragmented and complex. And in hindsight this is obvious, but it took me a while to truly understand that a theory is as much about the things to include as what to leave out. Now, there are many different roles and functions of theories, as discussed in Yvonne's excellent book about theories in HCI. Theories can be descriptive, clarifying terminology. They can be explanatory, revealing relationships and processes. Theories can help us making predictions. They can be prescriptive as a guidance for design, as you have seen in our work, and generative, helping us discovering and inventing something new. To me, Christine Halvorson describes the nature of theories really well when she writes that theories are more like a pair of dark glasses. We put them on and the world is tinted. The change brings some objects into sharper contrast, while others fade into obscurity. So this brings me to the end of my talk. The message from the beginning of this talk was that social sciences can inform and inspire the design of fluid interactions with digital surfaces and devices. And so it will be interesting to think about, as a community, of what other aspects of interactions with interactive surfaces and spaces we'd like to bring into sharper contrast. Before I end, here's a short video clip from my co-author Saul, who wanted to say hi to all of you.
There are some things you just don't want to get into close proximity to. Anyways, here I am. I'm in the Arizona desert somewhere. I wish I could be there with you, but I can't. So I just wanted to thank you so much. This is indeed an honor for the three of us. Thank you.
So with this, I'd like to end my talk. I wish you all a fantastic ISS conference in South Korea with lots of inspiring talks and conversations. I really miss not being there this year. ISS is such a wonderful community. And I thank you very much and hope to see you all again very soon. Thank you.